We're talking with Noah Weiss. He is an acquisition entrepreneur that has successfully purchased a business near St. Louis called Wired Electric. Noah closed on his business in February of 2024 and has been operating ever since. He has used the Acquira programs really start to finish to get him there. And this interview is going to go into a little more detail. Where were you and your spouse in the journey of life that kind of drove you to the decision to pursue the path of entrepreneurship through acquisition?
Yeah, it's a great question. So before we signed on with Acquira, my wife and I were living in Austin, Texas, working remote jobs. And my background originally was in software engineering, but then I spent a couple years doing talent acquisition. And what I realized was I had built up this skill set to both be able to make strong data-driven decisions, and also to help businesses grow. And in particular, businesses that had already achieved a certain level of profitability and a certain scale. I got to the point where I felt like it would be helpful to have something that would sort of accelerate that path to the point that I wouldn't have to be in a corporate job with a boss who was a boss who was a boss as long as I otherwise would. And so I kind of had the nexus of this realization that taking some more active forms of investment would be, more lucrative, just because typically, more active and more risk yields higher potential reward. And then the other side of that was I was just thinking like, what could I apply my skill set to? And I kind of had this realization moment where it just kind of hit me. I was like, oh, I can take this skill set that I have and like apply it to just growing a very small business into a less small business. And that there's sort of a lot of value to be added there, and that sort of ticks all the boxes of what I'm looking to do, career wise and financially. So it sort of came at me from multiple different angles.
So, had you embarked on that journey before you learned about Acquira?
Embarked, no. Researched, yes. I had spent a certain amount of time just Googling like how to buy a small business. What is the SBA? Got reached out to, or I got like marketed to, and so I saw the ads, and it was relevant to what I was doing. So I clicked on them. I went in. At first, I thought, hey man, this is way too good to be true. It's everything that I'm hoping for, and I was a little bit skeptical, but I dipped my toe in the water. I read a little bit more, and ultimately just spoke with some of the folks at Acquira and realized that this was just the perfect fit for what I wanted to do. So I took the leap.
If you don't mind, share a little bit more about maybe in your own mind, some of the pain points you might have been considering before you did sign up.
Yeah, well, so the number one and most obvious thing is just capital constraints. So, I only had a certain amount of capital, and like economically, in order for entrepreneurship through acquisition to be as lucrative and also as feasible. So like there needs to be a certain amount of scale already achieved, or a certain amount of infrastructure, where you're actually getting something. Part of it was just like being able to arrange the funding. I know Acquira has, an equity fund that helps partner with, AEs who are, promising and aligned with their investment thesis. So that was definitely, I would say, like the number one thing that was most attractive, but also it's something where the other issue was sort of the multiples, and also sort of finding and picking an industry and figuring out like what are the different characteristics and traits of a business that are worth buying, which is essentially like I didn't have the like vocabulary for this at the time, but it was sort of forming an investment thesis was something that I was essentially trying to work through without putting it in those terms. And I think trying to figure out like how to make those decisions, and like whittle down those criteria of like what do I actually want. Because as one of my advisors from Acquira said, like a lot of people, start their business maybe looking for like a home service business, and 2 months later, they're looking at chicken farms. So you get like wide, there are so many different opportunities that come around, and like being able to go about it in a structured and principled way where you're like using like values and principles based decision making as
Well, now your journey on a relative basis of all experience for these kinds of transactions, yours was reasonably straightforward. Let me ask the question, did you take a couple of swings at some other apples before you found this one?
Oh yeah, I mean this was definitely not the first offer that I had submitted. So I joined I signed on with Acquira like April of 2023. Um Completed the education by sometime in May, and then really in June was when I started to kick the search into full gear. So beginning of June, I think I made two offers on different businesses that for various reasons did not work out. One of them was an issue with the financing structure. Another one was an issue with licensing that came up, and then essentially, I would say probably like I don't even know what the total number of like deals that I at least initially vetted was, but I would say this was somewhere between the fifth and the 10th business that I really, had multiple calls with brokers and sellers and was really seriously vetting, and I brought to investment committee, and this was the third LOI or at least IOI, like indication of interest, if not letter of intent that I had written out.
Do you recall any specific aha moment?
I think it's applicable to almost any kind of small business, but a lot of the examples and sort of like motivating ideas are based around, home services in particular. And I think being able to isolate the different aspects, particularly like operationally and financially, which are not areas of businesses that I've normally worked in, um, or that I had worked in, like in my professional career, just like figuring out like what are the characteristics of of a good business in terms of like thinking about stability of the service that you offer, or stability of the demand for the service that you offer, um, the like steady and consistent profitability. Um, and yeah, I think there was sort of a moment where it sort of clicked into place, like these are the different things that I should be looking for in a business. Like it's not just all about what are the numbers on biz buy sell of the revenue, of the earnings, of the price. And that's a fine filter to have, but it's just like the it was sort of enlightening for me to start to dig in a little bit to the minutia of like it's not just a pure numbers based decision. Like there's a lot of nuance that goes into it, and something that they everybody told me, that a lot of people say, that didn't hit me until I was in well, I had actually closed on my business, is people say that you don't really know what you're buying until you've bought it. And you have a little bit of chance to step in. And I think, both there are positive and negative things. But definitely like it's crazy for me to think about how different my conception of the business was like a week before closing versus like a week or two after closing. Like there's so much learning, because I mean we had been vetting it for months, but like just that 1 to 2 weeks of actually being in it was like so valuable in terms of just like gaining understanding and learning.
Well, any parting words, Noah, that you would say to someone who is just thinking about this life change for themselves of becoming an entrepreneur through acquisition?
There are a couple of sort of words of wisdom that I would have. One is it really is possible, and I there were definitely times early on when I was going through my search trying to reach out to brokers where the brokers were gatekeeping, or sellers were not interested in selling to someone who didn't have industry specific experience, and like I definitely felt very discouraged at times. It's a grueling process to really immerse yourself in a search, but so worth it and so rewarding on its good days and even on its bad days. And then the other one, I think you're going to laugh when I say this, is however much working capital you think you need, you're wrong. You need more working capital, working capital, working capital, working capital. It's a mistake that I made that pretty much literally everybody that I've spoken to, who has also bought a business, is there. I mean, it sounds simple to say like, oh, everybody wishes that they had more money to use to run their business, but it really is, I think, the number one thing during diligence, like if a business is worth buying, that like you really need to make sure that you have way more than you think, because there will be all sorts of things that come up, that are, maybe not individually large expenses, but 500 small things can add up to a lot of money, and it can really put an unnecessary strain on the transitioning a business to new ownership.
Well, appreciate that, and absolutely, certainly agree with you on that. Anything else you want to add that I maybe didn't ask or cover that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's so many things that I tell to people who reach out to me. The don't buy in a union heavy area if you can avoid it. Talent acquisition is really hard. When Acquira says that you should get a people and culture person because it will be helpful, don't think that you're, the smartest kid on the block and that you can, put that off and it won't be a big deal, because it will be a big deal, and it definitely set me back probably a couple months in terms of a lot of what I wanted to get done. So this was something that another AE um, sort of told me, and who's very aspirational, which is who's crushing it with his business, and he essentially said, "Be a buzzsaw." So managing change is important, and it's difficult, and you certainly don't want to overwhelm your employees, but at the same time, to the extent that it is practicable and possible, you need to sort of be ruthlessly efficient with eliminating all of the like roadblocks in the way of implementing your vision, whether that be people who are in the wrong role or at the wrong company, or systems that maybe you don't like that are really hampering your business. And it can be tough to make some of those changes, but to some extent, unless it's totally rocking the boat, it's worth it. And every little one of those changes that I made that I was maybe scared to make on day one, now that I've grown a little bit less like abashed about making them, is I'm seeing the momentum grow so much faster than it otherwise would, just because I'm unwilling to let things that are unnecessary in my eyes just stop me from achieving my vision, and start it. Once you start to see that that come together, it'll pick up fast.
That's great advice, great wisdom. And that is hard sometimes, and particularly in situations you run into where you were told a clear story that this thing or this person or this system is really kind of almost a legacy, quote, I'll use air quotes, strength of the business. But when you really start working it, it's like, no, there's nothing strong about this at all.
Yeah.
It's an accommodation, it's a convenience, and no, we can do it better. So, well, all right, Noah, I appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this.
Awesome. Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, sir. Take care. Have a great day.